Hey, this is Jeff, and welcome back to the Coito Ergo Sum DLC crossover.
If I made out with the sink, would you pay attention to me?
That sounds sexy, but a light switch in a sink? I think you'd need to take some pretty serious precautions for that to work.
Oh, you're back. Did that trampy other light switch finally kick you to the curb?
Can you turn those lights on for me?
You bet I can. I bet that's more than that other tramp can do, huh?
Hopefully this will cheer her up. Mood lighting, please. I turned them off because the buff is actually applied when you turn them on, not if they're already on when you walk in. One more thing. As you can see, our brain isn't in the tank yet, presumably hiding in the ductwork like he said. I always thought the courier's brain sounded like Stewie from Family Guy, so much so that I googled it after last week, and it isn't. The voice actor is Sunil Malhotra, but I found an interview with him where he said his delivery was inspired by Stewie, so I wasn't too far off.
Sir is looking exceptionally sharp today, if Sir will permit the compliment.
Sir will permit the compliment. Thank you. So, weapons away, charisma buffed, time to have a chat with Klein and the rest of the think tank. Dr. Klein awaits. Make sure you're prepared to finish this once and for all. I am indeed prepared. I'm 99% sure we won't actually need the extra charisma because we did everyone's loyalty missions, but better safe than sorry. I mentioned that it's a little bit confusing that there's an appliance called the sink in the apartment called the sink, but I didn't mention this. The brains refer to themselves collectively as the think tank, but that's also what they call the room where they work. Anyway, they look like they're quite eager to hear how things went with Mobius.
The lobotomite returns. Our lobotomite. Has Dr. Mobius been denominated into scrap metal and voice module parts, as we hoped?
I found my brain. Now you and I are going to settle things.
I recommend watching your tone with me, lobotomite. Now, your brain. Hand it over, or we'll extract it again.
I'm not handing my brain over. There are some things we should discuss.
And what could we possibly have to speak about? You have the brain, we have the technology. All you must do is surrender. With it, we can finally leave this place. I cannot tell you how boring this place gets, chopping up the landscape and everything in it. And we have so many questions to ask your brain first. About this Mojave place. A fertile testing ground for our experiments.
Mobius and I talked it over, and we reached an understanding.
You are lying. No, you are not. Your heartbeat, perspiration, all excessively confident and sure of yourself. Why would you reason with that maniac? He'll destroy us all!
I can't let you dissect the Mojave, or let you leave.
Yes, you can. You don't really have an alternative that I can see.
Dr. Klein, I must intersect. Please, do not harm the lobotomite.
I'm not going to harm it. I'm going to dissect it until it's dead. Why the sudden intersection, Dalla?
I cannot stand a sweet breathing organism, breathing in and out to suddenly not breathe. We must keep it alive. For study. Slow study.
Dalla, these vocalized pauses are unlike you. What do you care?
Klein, this lobotomite, it's a great sounding board. You respect ideology, right? This one's, well, it's got good ideas.
Silence, Dr. O. This is a think tank decision. Save your objections until after I have decided our course of action.
You know what, Klein? Stick a straw in your tank and suck yourself. Long and deep. And my name is Zero. Yeah, a A big, fat 0 with a slash through it.
The slash as a designator. Why, that is brilliant. But how did you...
The lobotomite taught me that. Taught me a name is more than, that I should take pride in things like names. And... You know what? Forget it, Klein. I hate you. And your theory of brachial beam oscillation? The Chinese had it first, you copycat.
How dare you? Brachial beam oscillation was solely my discovery. I expressly told you that and deleted all evidence to the contrary. It's 2-8. Why are you acting like this? You've never refused to commit necessary surgery before. And this lobotomite needs its surgery. A noble speech, but there's no room in my vocabulators for friend and lobotomite in the same sentence. The very concept, revolting. Perhaps you are irradiated with camaraderie radiation. We have chems for that. We can save you from your emotional addiction.
I, for one, cannot bear to let this continue. I don't see what is to be gained by throwing another body into our labs, especially one that has done us a service, gone where we feared to go. This lobotomite doesn't deserve our knives. It deserves our respect. We should care for it, feed it, nurture it, give it the life Gabe never had.
Why am I even listening to you fools? Enough of this mutinous chorus. If there's a word I hate, it's mutiny. And the word jism, which never made any sense to me. It's ridiculous putting j and zm together like that. Nonsense! I count as 5, like the mighty human hand I once had, with its 5 penises clenched in a fist.
Sounds to me like your math is wrong, and the odds aren't good.
Nonsense! The mathematics of this situation are on our side, lobotomite. I believe... No, wait. Carry the 2, then... If this were a democracy, I would be concerned. We are too scientific for that. So just surrender.
It's not a democracy, it's a research facility, and over half your colleagues dispute your findings.
You dare use logic against me?
I do. Here's the deal. I'm not going to surrender. You are.
That's no deal at all. There's a whole world beyond the crater, filled with ideas and possibilities. We could have escaped, seen it all for ourselves, tested it, prodded at it, made it squirm.
You can still do that. Here, quietly, for me. Superweapons and all that.
For you? And for science? I have a strange sensation that I would like that. How odd. Very well, partner. The think tank is at your service as long as you do not destroy us.
And that settles that. One weird thing about Boros, the way the DLC normally works is, if you pick the insensitive option at the end of his loyalty mission, which might be your only option if you didn't have enough speech skill or the animal friend perk, he still seems a little bit sad, but rationalizes what he did as being for science. Which makes sense. But in the final confrontation, he gives Klein the endorsement we just heard, and in subsequent conversations, if you talk to him again, he recants his methods and has lasting remorse. Whereas if you take one of the compassionate options, like we did, he's crushed at the time, which we heard, But his eventual endorsement to Klein is to keep you alive so they can continue experimenting on you. And if you follow up with him later, he's still doing cruel experiments on animals. Now, I'm all about Courier Jeff living with the consequences of his mistakes, but I'm 99% sure that's a bug. So I used a little console command before I started to switch the flag and make him nice to animals from now on, which is what I thought I was doing in the first place. If you find yourself in the same situation and want to use the same fix, here it is. Set, double quote, 09. You'll need to change the 09 to the load order of Old World Blues on your system. It's 09 on my system, but it's probably different on yours. 00E5D3, double quote, dot N Gabe confront to 2. And if you wanted him to keep being a dick and you're wondering why he started being nice despite your best efforts, change the last number in the command from 2 to 1.
As it had been in the years before the Great War, Big Mountain, the Big Empty, became home to one of the brightest minds of the 23rd century. The Courier watched over the Big Empty for years to come, caring for it and keeping its discoveries safe until they were needed to help others. Which had always been Big Mountain's purpose. Past the laboratories and science, it had always been intended as a place to build the future of all mankind.
The Sync Central Intelligence Unit was impressed by the amount of exploration the Courier had undertaken. Facilities believed lost, destroyed, or ones that had simply gotten up and walked to new locations had been rediscovered by its intrepid new master. Internally, the artificial personality debated as to whether it preferred the old management to the new, and concluded that the Courier's thorough approach to research and investigation was admirable and worthy of its respect.
Dr. Mobius continued his research undisturbed in the Forbidden Zone. As much as he had attempted to create better scorpions, he tried the same with humanity, with considerably less success. These failures didn't bother him overmuch. Once the rush of mentats wore off, he forgot he had failed in any event. After all, the bright young mind who had come to visit him in the Forbidden Zone had already exceeded his expectations.
The Sync atop the dome bustled with the voices of a small town, constantly chirping, arguing, and snarling at each other. Still, this all happened productively in the interests of its new owner. The Sync Central Intelligence Unit discovered, despite its inversion code, it was comforted by the sense of community the other personalities gave it.
The Biological Research Station, obsessed with seeding everything in sight, requested a transfer to the X-22 Botanical Garden, so that it might, in its own words, sensually fertilize the garden's smooth contours. The garden sent back a polite refusal, saying it had prior commitments with a vault it had helped infect before the war.
The book chute continued to devour all seditious materials until it nearly choked on a paperclip. It adamantly maintained it was a Chinese paperclip, and the whole thing had been an elaborately orchestrated assassination attempt. Whatever the reason, it slowed down for a while, carefully appraising each document and clipboard that came to it.
The light switches continued to bicker and flicker.
This persisted until the day someone dropped a flashlight in the sink, and the two of them united in their hatred of the showboat. One of them eventually transferred to the Lightwave Dynamics plant and began a long, unrequited affair with one of the holograms.
The sink continued to ruthlessly scrub any particulate matter that came near it. Eventually, it gained access to the magnetohydraulics plant and nearly flooded all the Big Empty in an attempt to scrub the crater clean. Once it learned of the innovative toxins plant, however, it gained new purpose. It sought to develop antitoxins to flush into its drains and counteract the poisons bleeding into the soil.
The toaster, continued its psychotic spree, reducing all appliances in range to scrap electronics and spare parts. After one of its more psychotic episodes, however, the other Sync personalities decided enough was enough, and dumped the toaster in a bathtub. Sparking and hissing, the toaster swore its enemies would rue the day when they had bread and no way to toast it.
Muggy did his best to collect coffee cups, although in his quest, he accidentally trapped himself in Higgs Village. It might have been the end for poor Muggy. Except he found it peaceful there, tidying up the kitchens of the think tank professors back when they had been flesh and bone. Well, except for Dr. O, who was an asshole for having created Muggy in the first place. Muggy left O's house deliberately dirty, punishing the dishes and cups that lived there in blind revenge for serving Dr. O.
Blind old Jefferson, with sounds the courier brought him, created a symphonic counter-frequency that saved Big Mountain from sonic invasion in 2910. If you didn't hear about it, good. It was rumored by the other personalities that he had a brief fling with the light switches. Although he forgot their names much too often and was soon left in the dark as punishment.
Autodoc, always gentle and methodical, kept sewing up the courier in all the right places when the skin split open from repeated wear and tear. The Autodoc was just glad to have purpose again. It heard its simpler brothers and sisters who got shipped to the Sierra Madre were bored out of their skulls in that toxic dead city. In time, the Autodoc found a way to deactivate the Y-17 trauma harnesses, releasing the corpses they had held prisoner for almost 200 years.
As the courier ran through the X-8 facility multiple times, the computers analyzed the test subject's movements. Rather than performing a superficial observation, they realized the subject barely knew what communism was, or even what a high school was. This confused them for a time, until the facility finally realized that its research had succeeded. So it let its cyberdogs out into the wastes to help protect small communities from physical aggression rather than communist propaganda.
The infiltration program in X-13 felt spent, having repeatedly upgraded the stealth suit until it could upgrade it no more. It felt warm, fulfilled, and a bit sluggish. It realized not long after the stealth suit had left it without so much as a note on the nightstand. So the infiltration program sent out robo-brains into the wastes, looking for its wayward technology. It eventually found Repcon HQ and set up a new research center, testing and murdering fiends who kept breaking into the facility.
The courier left the brain at the Big Empty. A strange thing to say, but it was the truth. Brains are less important than they may seem. When the courier's body finally passed, the brain was saddened. It kept on, remembering the vessel that had once contained it. Even at the end, when it started to fail, however, the brain resisted going into a floating chassis like the think tank. It never said why. Perhaps it was out of respect for the courier's body. All things must come to an end, and to hang on to the past is something that's not to be undertaken lightly.
Dr. Klein and the think tank remained alive, unaware of the world outside. They looped through their daily routine, none the wiser about the world beyond, although perhaps wiser was the wrong word. The world outside belonged to the Courier, and if anyone would shape it, well, the Courier had already called dibs.
There is an expression in the wasteland, old world blues.
It refers to those so obsessed with the past they can't see the present, much less the future, for what it is.
They stare into the what was, eyes like pilot lights, guttering and spent, as the realities of their world continue on around them.
Science is a long, steady progression into the future. What may seem a sudden event often isn't felt for years, even centuries, to come.
In the times following the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, however, old world blues took on a new meaning.
Where once it was viewed as a form of sadness, nostalgia, it became an expression describing the potential for the future.
It can be easy to see science as evil, technology unchecked as the source of all ills, all misfortunes.
With the Courier at the helm, science became a beacon for the future. There was old world blues, and new world hope. And hope ruled the day at Big Mountain.
We could say more, but the stories in the Big Empty speak for themselves. Now armed with the transportal ponder, the Courier could return to the dome at any time and crack open the secrets of the Big Empty one by one. The sink sat vigilant, waiting for its master to return, shoes covered in Mojave dust. Only one road yet remained, and it was one the Courier had to walk alone.
And I believe that's the 100% completion, good karma, good ending. Some of which I may have never seen before, and certainly not all in the same playthrough. If you want to see some fairly rare bad ending slides, check out the Skills Dash series. Courier Max had evil karma, and he did the absolute minimum required to collect all the skill books and go home, and the prognosis for the Mojave was a bit more grim. Now, you've acquired the Big Mountain Transportal Ponder. To return to the Mojave or go back to Big Mountain from the Mojave, simply equip the Transportal Ponder as you would any weapon, pull the trigger, and away you'll go. Note that it won't work in interiors or in combat situations and is totally incapable of harming your enemies. It's not explicitly stated, but it makes sense to me that your brain made it by hacking the teleporter system that brought us here. It obviously can't be something the brains had laying around, or they would have used it themselves to escape. And Mobius says your brain can unlock the radar fence for you after you deal with the think tank, but that never happens. You still always get teleported back to the sink if you approach the perimeter, even if you use the autodock to get all of your original organs back. Which might be because they're not strictly original, they're all slightly augmented. We know other humans with no cybernetic enhancements can pass through it. Elijah, Christine, Ulysses, that followers doctor we found on the dome, and probably others who got turned into lobotomites. My theory is your brain reasoned that any modification to the radar fence that would allow you to pass through would create a vulnerability the brains might eventually exploit. So he created the Transportal Ponder instead. Anyway, all that's left is to tie up a few loose ends and head home. There's actually not a lot more we need to do here. Unlike Honest Hearts, where I did the main quest without too many distractions because it seemed pretty urgent, and then did a final sweep of the map for anything interesting I missed before leaving Zion Valley, I did pretty much the exact opposite here. However, there are a couple things worth looking at before we go. First, standing on the waste disintegration platform handrail, you can make out a few more letters of the Securitron deconstruction sign. A, U, T, and another T. We already saw an O, M, and N on the ground, and the M in the first word had me stumped at the time, but now it's obviously automaton. Next, the top of the western train tunnel. The first time we were here, well, down there, I said we were right around the corner from X-13. When we finally went to X13, I walked up the hill to make sure, so I could correct myself if I'd been wrong, but I was right, so I cut that bit because it just wasn't that interesting. But while I was editing, I saw some pipes that looked like a way to get onto the roof, which I hadn't been able to do from the ground. And they are right here. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some loot up there. Microfusion cells. And a lair. Very nice. I think I have like 5 of these now. Last thing, starting back at the Western Train Tunnel. When I was on top of the crane at the construction site, I thought I had seen more crates than I eventually found. It turns out if you climb onto the hill above the train tunnel, in addition to being able to get over to that pipe and the roof of X13, there's a whole playable plateau above the gully where we found the 2 internment camp escapees, the ones with a bone saw and an ashtray. Around there is the way to the X13 roof. And around here is where the crates I missed were, and a bit more minor loot. But the real story is that you can get to what I believe is the highest point in the crater that's inside the radar fence. Which right here you can see it goes around the backside of this rock. If we go around the other way, we can get on top of it. The last few crates I'd missed were down there someplace. There's another level below this that you can't get to from the construction site or the internment camp. And other than that first rock we jumped up beside the tunnel, there's not even any tricky climbing required. You can just walk right up. There's nothing up here except a nice view. The X13 dish and the Hexcrete archipelago. You can see where the radar fence goes there, around the back. And here we are. Top of the world, Ma. Go up on this final point and have a look around. I almost feel like a wrap-up review of Old World Blues isn't really necessary, but I did it for Dead Money and Honest Hearts, and I definitely don't want to shortchange this one. I've said on several occasions this is my favorite DLC in the Fallout franchise, and maybe for any video game ever, and that opinion did not change. The characters are all fantastic, the new enemies and items are extremely cool, the world map is a joy to explore, and visually just about every area has something that grabs your attention and makes you want to run over and check it out. Which is almost always worth doing because there will be a dungeon or an outdoor set piece with fun fights and worthwhile loot. And all that would be enough to set it apart, but the thing I really love about the Fallout franchise, the dark humor and retrofuturistic tone, they are at their absolute pinnacle here. And not just because it's hilarious and packed with over-the-top retro sci-fi tropes, but because the jokes aren't just a distraction, they always support the story. The running gag with the geniuses being clueless turns out to be a major plot point. Their amusing personality quirks can be instrumental in getting a good ending. Terminals and notes and even environment details tell stories that are frequently funny, but they give you important backstory and context about the work at Big Mountain that helps you evaluate the situation. One of my favorite examples of a bit that works on both levels is how Dala tells you Mobius was exiled for crimes too heinous to remain in memory, hits a beat, and adds, also maybe differences in research methodology. You could easily think that's just a joke, but it turns out the setup is false in almost every detail, and the punchline is what actually happened. Do I have any criticism at all? Well, setting aside the glitches that are inevitable with the Bethesda physics engine and the New Vegas Construction Kit's visual dialogue tool, I guess there is one thing. Here outside Higgs Village, if you go around the corner... Hello. This isn't what I wanted to show you, but it might be something else I missed.
You could run. I am trying to kill you after all.
This might just be a random robo-brain, but there's a unique boss. Yes, Super Ego. He hangs out in this part of the world, and I was kind of surprised we didn't run into him the first time we came to Higgs Village. But when you get that critical hit stun with Revelation, even a boss is done for. Anyway, if you climb this rock and jump onto the I-beams, you can shimmy around and get on the roof. Go up to the highest point. Okay, I thought I had it, but one more time. Okay, you're going to have to take my word for this, but with fraps off, I can make that jump every time. I did it like 10 times in a row. With fraps on, I can't make it ever. And I tried way more than 10 times. The difference in frame rate must make the tiniest difference in the physics calculations, and I bounce off every time. Which is now going to be my excuse every time I fail to climb something. Anyway, back to the problem I mentioned in the wrap-up. If you go to the south edge, you can see the radar fence comes down over the hill from X2, around the back of Higgs Village. And if we go over to the east side, you can see, if you poke your head over the edge, that it clearly cuts through the hangar building. And sure enough, if you walk to the southeast corner, you get the perimeter warning. Now let's go inside. Here in the southeast corner, in Boros' backyard, nothing. A glaring oversight. But wait, you say, what if the hangar wall is shielding you from the radar fence? And yes, that could be, but if that's the case, then it's a gaping plot hole. The brains could simply encase their jars in whatever the hangar wall is made of and fly through the fence. I wish I had never found this, because it ruins the whole DLC for me. And yes, that was sarcasm. Other than a small handful of minor continuity errors with the environment like this and the hallway in X8 that does or doesn't have a door depending on which side of the glass you're on, in my opinion, Old World Blues is as close to perfect as a game can be. Well, we can finally go home, but there's good news and bad news. Bad news first? The transportal ponder says it's keyed to my biometrics and no one else can use it. The good news is, you're not a cyborg, so you can get through the radar fence. Might be a long walk, but... I'm kidding. I mean, I'm not kidding, but hold my hand and cross your fingers. And we're back in the Mojave. Even better, Kekata did come with us. And I'm massively over-encumbered with all of our souvenirs, but that doesn't matter because I have the long haul perk, so we can fast travel back to Pahrump. And now sort some loot.
Let's go to bed. I'm so horny I could hump a death claw.
Yeah, sorting loot can wait. I like the sound of that.
I thought you might. Let's go.
Excuse us for an hour or two. The vacuum tubes all have different probabilities in the loot lists, so if we never found one of these before, it must be a fairly rare one. His dialogue also reflects the relative scarcity. 75 M8C. I was almost out of those. Thanks. Should be a pretty good reward then. Really? Okay, if you find any more, I can always use them. A shotgun shell. How thoughtful. Stay safe. The rewards are random too, but they're generally better for the rare ones. Guess we got unlucky. Hey, Angie. I know you're into fashion almost as much as Brett, and since she's already rocking the Zion tribal look, I think it's your turn. What do you say?
Sure.
I found a new war dramatic pattern at Big Mountain. These are all the rage this season. You're going to love it. Well, see you later.
Bye-bye.
Oh yeah, very elegant. Brett, looking fine as usual.
How you today?
Can't lie, I'm doing great. Don't be too jealous of Angie's new outfit, okay?
Hey.
Damn, I love my job. Now, next on the agenda is finding good homes for Fido and K9000. Handy already carries a minigun, so she's comfortable with heavy weapons, and pets do need discipline. But... yeah. That's a hard nope. I did think about giving one of them to Kekata. Favorable geography kept Pahrump isolated and prosperous for 200 years, with no serious trouble from raiders or factions that might exploit them, but I always worry a little bit that my notoriety might draw unwanted attention. On the other hand, with slugs, her combat shotgun actually has better DPS than Fido. Not as good as K9000, but she brings plenty of punch to the Pahrump militia. And security at the saloon is pretty tight, too. Plus, I was only kidding about Handy, but Deanna's always out on photography assignments, and there's really nobody else there I'd trust with a pet. Maybe Brett, but she's an entertainer, not a security guard. So looking beyond my home and my business, the perfect candidate would be somebody compassionate, who I trust, who knows a lot about medicine and science to be able to take good care of it, and who lives in a neighborhood that's dangerous enough to make sure it gets a lot of exercise, but not so dangerous that they might get killed and let it fall into the wrong hands. And it would be a plus if they worked for a faction that shares my values. I doubt anyone is really surprised I was talking about Julie. Even my disembodied brain seemed impressed by her when we talked to it last week. Anyway, some characters with a barter menu will use items you sell them if they're better than what they already had. Hopefully she's one of those.
We don't have a lot right now, but this is what I can offer for sale.
And I don't really want any caps, but I guess giving her a gun worth 10,000 for less than 3 is generous enough. Well, unfortunately, it wasn't in her barter menu or her personal inventory, so I reloaded my last save. It probably went into her merchant container, but then it doesn't show up in her menu because the only item type she's flagged as a vendor for is meds. So we'll do it the hard way and reverse pickpocket it onto her. And I lost karma for that. Oh, the irony. She has it. Why won't she equip it? She doesn't have any ammo. Hold on. I need to make a quick trip to the gun runners. Give her the ammo. Lose more karma. And she still won't equip it. Her AI package flags are probably set to have her sandbox with her weapon unequipped. Let's just make sure. Yeah, she has Fido and the ammo. Perfect. Now remember, he likes JFP, but it makes him poop a lot. And he likes hollow points as a treat, although around here, Freeside thugs, no armor, you could probably feed him those all the time. Or save him as treats, up to you. And FYI, I'm going to give K9000 to another follower, so maybe they can get together for playdates or whatever. You got this. See you later. I'm not giving K9000 to Dr. Usanagi, although I'm sure she'd give him a good home, but I'm really here because I remembered I took a point of endurance for one of my level ups at Big Mountain, specifically so I could get another implant. And since I was already in the neighborhood, I want to buy an implant.
All right, let me do a quick test to make sure your body can handle another implant. All right, you're healthy enough to handle another one. Which surgery are you considering?
Ironically, the endurance implant.
The nociception regulator modifies your cardiovascular system, and you won't tire as quickly. The price is 4,000 caps, same as most other implants.
Here you go.
Have a seat in the auto dock. This will take a few hours.
I'm going to give K9000 to Dr. Luria since she travels a lot. Plenty of opportunity for K9000 to run and bark and chew on fiends. So next stop, the follower's safe house. She's not here right now, but this brings back some memories. This was my player home for a long time until I started the Coito Ergo Sum walkthrough, back when I was, I don't know, level 32 maybe. We'll wait a few hours and see if she shows up. There she is. She doesn't have a barter menu, so we'll just go straight to reverse pickpocketing. Use another stealth boy to make sure we're not caught. Cyberdog gun. And don't forget the ammo.
May I help you?
No, but you might want to check your pockets after I leave. Now, while I sometimes use console commands to get around issues with the game, I always try to let Courier Jeff live with the consequences of bad decisions, and I'm going to, but I also want to show you the special magazine theme bonus that's only possible to complete now that the Old World Blues crossover is done. So, imagine an alternate universe in which he wasn't so impatient to publish an issue with Vera Keys on the cover that he ended up with no theme bonus at all. I used a console command to reset Vera back to posed but not published status, so we'll select her for the cover, Dala as the opener, and Fresca as the closer. You can see Larry now has a comment we've never heard if we ask him about the layout. What do you think?
Perhaps my judgment is clouded by nostalgia, but I can't imagine a more stirring theme than a pre-war extravaganza.
That's it. Thanks.
My pleasure.
Goodbye.
I'll speak with you later.
As his comment implies, that theme does get a substantial bonus. But unfortunately, Courier Jeff did already use Vera, so back to the Prime universe. Back in the universe where we did already use Vera, we'll do a Bookworms theme issue with Dala on the cover. Saffron in front. And April Mortimer in back. The last two get the middle tier bonus for either section, so it doesn't matter which way around we put them. Dala gets the top bonus wherever you put her, but she's worth the most on the cover. And Larry doesn't... Oh, yes he does.
Mr. Solo, Oh, my mistake. With the satellite work and other clubs have been checking in. I was expecting a call from Lollipop Steel Town.
One of the new features in the Coito Ergo Sum base mod is that Larry has specific comments on various theme issues now, instead of just a generic comment that lets you know if a draft layout is eligible for a theme bonus at all or not. Before I print it, what do you think of the current layout?
Naughty nerds. I like it.
Not a big deal, just a little extra feedback for the publishing minigame. And there's her Luma screen. And while we're on the subject of Dala, I know some longtime fans of the mod are probably disappointed that, well, there were some conversations on the Nexus forums back in the day about getting her a body and possibly even becoming a companion, but that just didn't pan out. Back in the episode where we watched her video, I said I didn't want to go into detail because spoilers, and now that we've seen the end of the DLC, I can explain a little better. Executive summary? Any way of making it happen that was plausible from a technology standpoint didn't make sense in terms of character and plot, and vice versa. More specifically, the whole point of Old World Blues is that you can't let the think tank get out of Big Mountain. Any method I could devise to free Dala but not the others was either really involved and difficult, or it felt cheap and implausible, or it wasn't lore-friendly, or some combination of the three. And if your brain wasn't back in your body, it'd hide in the ductwork and do everything in its power to stop you, and so would Mobius if he was still alive. High level, the options would be to breach or disable the radar fence, or put her brain in a body that could go through it, or use the transporter beam. The thing that seemed most consistent with canon, their original plan, in fact, was, with high enough science or medicine skill, using yourself as a template, maybe you could figure out how to reprogram the autodoc to transplant her brain into a lobotomite, but it wouldn't look like her. I mean, lobotomites look pretty rough, and Dala seems too vain for that, but once she's outside the radar fence, you could take her to Cytogenesis and transfer her mind into a new body that would look like her self-image. But once you've established that as a possibility, how do you stop the rest of them from doing it? And sure, I can imagine a few reasons the Courier might actually want to release them. If you're doing a Legion playthrough, you might think their authoritarian worldview would fit right in. And Kaisar doesn't let his troops use advanced technology, but he has an autodoc in his tent. I'm sure he could find some way to use their knowledge. At the other end of the spectrum, maybe you're super into civil liberties and you think keeping them locked up is unfair. Which I'm kind of in that camp myself in principle, but not killing them is one thing, letting them out is too risky for me. But maybe you think that risk is worth it. Or maybe you just want to watch the world burn. Even assuming there was a realistic, lore-friendly way to let some of them out and keep the others locked up, they'd all pose different levels of risk to the Mojave, and probably have different degrees of appetite for leaving. Boros would be dangerous, but maybe you could feed his paranoia so he couldn't work up the nerve to leave the safety of the think tank. Klein is really dangerous, and he definitely wants out. I mean, even though he finds biology repugnant, transplanting their brains into lobotomites to circumvent the radar fence was his idea. And Dala, she'd be the most eager to leave and has the most nostalgia for physical pleasure, but she's also the biggest threat. Another wrinkle is related to one of the many details in the DLC that seem absurd on the surface, but make sense if you think about it. Mobius and the think tank are organic brains, but they all occasionally talk about their processors and databanks and reprogramming themselves as if they were computers. But their senses are hooked up to radar and microphones and such, so they've clearly mastered the brain-machine interface. Why wouldn't they augment their cognitive functions the same way? A lot of people today don't retain or even bother learning things they would have 25 years ago, because now the information is never farther away than their phone or computer. Imagine having Mega and Google and every online calculator you could ever want wired directly into your brain. Reverting to human senses would be a big adjustment in itself, but how would they react to suddenly being disconnected from all that? The point is, I just couldn't see any way to give Dala a body that didn't spiral into a huge quest thing that lets you figure out how to set them free, optionally pick who stays and who goes, and what the consequences are for the Mojave. And that was way beyond the scope of the DLC crossover because, except for having them pose for the magazine, it doesn't have anything to do with Coito Ergo Sum. And that's why Dala didn't get a body in the crossover. One last thing I didn't mention in my wrap-up review. Old World Blues dovetails very organically with events from the other DLC, recontextualizing Dead Money and foreshadowing Lonesome Road. Although in Elijah's case, it doesn't so much recontextualize as reinforce my impression that he was a guy who was not to be taken lightly, but who wasn't as good as he thought he was. He defeated the think tank partly because he was a technological badass, but I have to believe they'd have stopped him cold if they weren't already brain damaged. But looking forward, we now know there were weather control experiments in Hopeville that may or may not have turned out as well as planned. We know a lot more about the mysterious other courier, who we first heard about from Johnson Nash. His outlook seems to be similar to Courier Jeff's with regard to Mojave politics and wanting to make the world a better place, but he seems to be unhappy about some interaction they had in the past. And maybe most ominous of all, Klein and Mobius both said he didn't get brain scrubbed, and he left Big Mountain with dangerous knowledge. But before I start Lonesome Road, I want to do a non-DLC episode to cover the new stuff in the Coito Ergo Sum base mod update. It was recently released on the Nexus, and as I've mentioned several times, it's a prerequisite for the Old World Blues module, but it also has some new features that aren't related to any of the DLC. And as I said last week, I want to grab a few skill books from the base game before I do anything else that'll earn a lot of XP to make sure Courier Jeff doesn't end up just shy of straight 100s when he hits level 50. I can keep my eye out for those while we're recruiting previously unavailable models and so forth. So I'm going to do that next, and then we'll start Lonesome Road. Thanks for watching. Like, leave a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next week.